Let's not paint any pictures any differently. There were many times my huge mouth got in the way of common sense.
When it comes to the term rise and fall within the video game industry, there is one name that stands head and shoulders above everybody else. Peter Molyneux. A chap who has made quite literally some of the very best games ever created, and a chap that even to this day is recognised as one of the more influential game designers going, especially within the PC space. Dungeon Keeper, Populous, Fable, Black and White, Syndicate, Theme Park. Seriously, the guy is right up there with some of the very, very best creators ever. But on the flip side, all of this fame and recognition that comes from creating such legendary titles does sadly create a guy that is without a doubt a bit too overpromising. And in 2015, when things got really bad for him, Peter, somebody who loved to be front and centre on any news articles, stated in an interview with The Guardian,
"It's over. I will not speak to the press again."
So why was this? Well, to be fair, his reputation had been going downhill a fair bit for quite some time, primarily due to his overpromising of previous games that had already made it out, for better or worse. But this was due to one of his absolute worst projects to date, and that game is, of course, Godus.
I wanna take you for a ride.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, today I plan to talk to you guys about a game by a guy that should have been brilliant. I plan to talk to you guys about some serious overpromising, some broken dreams, a crazy amount of time wasting, and a game that is far from anything. Godus is nothing, and it was all started by one of the leading gentlemen in all of gaming. Godus was Peter Molyneux's final fall from grace, and today I plan to talk about this terrible crowdfunding disaster in Godus, the Peter Molyneux Kickstarter disaster. Hey there guys, I hope you're enjoying the video. I just want to give a massive shout out to all of you for actually clicking on the video. Thank you so much. And also a massive shout out goes out to my Patreons and YouTube members who were able to see this video back on the 14th of November 2020. Damn, over 6 months ago. As a Patreon or YouTube member, you'll be able to check out all of the upcoming Kick Scammer videos before they go public, such as Kickstarter's dumbest scam, the Paprium scandal, Jasmine Tridevil's bizarre GoFundMe, and the upcoming Kickstarter's crypto scams. If you do want to support the show and help me continue to create videos like these and see these videos before they go public, you can do so right now by supporting the show for as little as you wish by becoming a Patreon or YouTube member. Links will be down below. But anyway, let's carry on with the video. Peter Molyneux is often cited as being the creator of the God game genre, and you can see why with titles such as Populous and Black and White behind him. Yes. And you know what? This is something that he actually lived and breathed in his real life too. In fact, one of the biggest influences of Black and White was a single Tamagotchi. A Tamagotchi that Peter would hang around his neck on a chain and get ridiculed for being a fully grown man doing such a childish thing. This resulted in colleague Andy Robson getting so fed up with this that one day, after finding the little plastic egg watch abandoned on Peter's table, picked it up and plonked it into his cup of tea, killing Peter's Meimechi in the process. Peter was distraught and even went into mourning over the little Tamagotchi, and according to a Eurogamer interview, he said,
"That's when I thought, God, if I really feel that emotionally attached to this little bit of plastic, how much more can we do with that?"
Turns out Black and White was what he could do with that, and obviously it went on to be a massive success with multiple add-ons and sequels being released over the next several years. And then of course you've got the Fable series, another collection of games that had Molyneux at the forefront, going to press releases and over-promising as he always does, pushing his team to do more and more, and ultimately, again for better and for worse, actually releasing a game that at one point, according to Microsoft, was their most successful IP, behind the Halo series of course. These godlike games were the natural progression towards Godus, the Kickstarter that we are going to be talking about today. And if you think he overpromised in the past, you ain't seen nothing yet. In order to get people excited for the games at Lionhead, he would constantly talk to the press explaining features that had either not been agreed upon yet or were completely made up. If you were a purchaser of games such as Fable and your first time knowing about the game was via an advert or even on the store shelf itself, then this wouldn't be a problem. But for everyone else that was actually following these interviews, as good as the games were, and for the most part they really were quite good games, they didn't include all of the features promised. This not only wound up the fans, but it wound up the developers too. And in early 2012, several key long-time Lionhead veterans who disapproved of Peter's approach to game development and the way the company was being run, all decided to leave on the very same day. A day that would forever be known as Black Monday. Peter saw this as an attack on him directly, and because of this, it was one of the final nails in the coffin that he needed to also leave Lionhead. He packed up his stuff, he moved over the road, he set up a new studio called 22 Cans, and that was the end of that. Although it wasn't the end of his God game obsession. Something was cooking behind the scenes at 22 Cans, and to promote it, a game called Curiosity, or Curiosity What's Inside the Cube, was released onto mobile phones, which basically was exactly what it sounded like. A giant cube that collectively people from around the world would chisel away at in an attempt to remove 60 billion smaller cubes, or cubelets if you prefer, in order to get to the centre. What's in the centre, I hear you ask? Nobody knew, but just like the title suggested, everybody was curious. The more you tapped, the closer you got. It was reported that 2,000 layers were here, and the game proved to be so popular that it actually turned out to be a bit of a stress to sign into the servers if you wanted to participate. It was so incredibly popular. This breakthrough success caught Molyneux off guard. He was expecting on average about 30,000 people in total, and he got that within the first 3 hours of the app going live. Again, this didn't exactly shine him in the greatest light, as the majority of people couldn't sign in to play it, and those that did, well, they saw loads of penises, and the majority of people that tapped away used it to draw this very thing. It also didn't help that an accidental technical error suddenly removed everybody's gold, and there was just no way to bring it back. As much as people may have moaned about all of this, Peter, rightfully, did not expand on those servers. It was still 30,000 allowed in at one time. I assume this was done so that it wouldn't end too soon, and the penis artwork was also left in, resulting in floods of other artists, who were mostly Italian apparently by the way, coming in and cleverly changing up those dick pics for palm trees, puppy dog faces, or whatever. Whatever you want to call this thing, it was a successful social experiment for Peter Molyneux. It brought communities together, it got them all to express themselves, I suppose you could say, and best of all, for 22 Cans, it made them some nice pocket money with microtransactions. The faster you chipped away, the more in-game currency you got to get tools, which helps you chip away faster. It was as basic could get for a game on any platform, yet the idea of working together to remove blocks piece by piece by piece, and after an hour or so of playing, zooming out to see what you've all collectively done, was oddly satisfying. There was no way to lose in a game like this, but you could definitely win.
Is the power of curiosity enough to unite the whole world in solving one mystery? Buried in the center of this cube is one life-changing secret. It will take the entire world to chip away at its many layers, but only one person will find out what's inside. We assure you, whoever chips away at that last block will have their life changed forever.
Yep, it's the old golden ticket idea all over again, only this time it's far more vague. Anyway, whilst the world chipped away trying to find out what was in the centre, Peter, who you would already think is in first gear on the hype train, decided to hit the NOS. Train NOS. He was working on his best game ever, a game that was the result of 20 years of game development. It's going to be a world, it's going to have something to do with life, artificial intelligence and simulation, and it's going to embrace this new creative world that we're entering now, and it's going to be more a hobby than it is a game, with 100 million DAUs, aka daily active users. See what I mean? Even though by this point the world had grown tired of Peter's overpromising, claiming that the injured guests in Theme Park will appear in Theme Hospital, claiming that Project Milo was a real game and not just a tech demo, claiming that your real-world DVDs will run on in-game screens in Syndicate, and obviously most iconic of all, claiming that if you plant an acorn in Fable, it will grow into a tree during your playthrough.
How can I try and get over this stupid line I said back in 1999, I think it was, about an acorn and an oak tree?
Still, with everything that happened in the past, it was hard to not get excited again. Peter sounded like he was going back to his roots with this new game at 22 cans, and this cube tappy thing with the ultimate prize in the centre was incredibly intriguing. Only one person was going to get to the centre, hackers couldn't find out what it was as it wasn't coded in until the last minute, and in an interview on the lead up to the app's release at Peter's house, even his own family didn't know what was inside the cube. 7 months passed while people tapped away at this thing, and then in May of 2013, Brian Henderson clicked that last tiny cubelet and saw the following video.
Welcome to the end of Curiosity. We started this experiment back in November of 2012, and we have been completely blown away by how the world has embraced this amazing experiment. And that's exactly what it was, an experiment. Could we take the simplest possible conceivable thing, connecting people together and allowing them to tap on this massive cube, could we take that and pose this question of what's in the center? Now, when we released it, the first real question was, what is inside the cube? And I said, and I'm known for these things, I said there's something amazing inside, something life-changing inside. Well, this is what this video is about. After 25 billion cubelets have been destroyed over 150 days, after 4 million people have downloaded it onto various devices, and after hosting tens of thousands of simultaneous concurrent users, we have reached the end, and one lucky person has reaped the rewards of their hard efforts. How can anything be worth all that effort? Well, we could give you a piece of advice. We could say, oh, be nice to people. We could say, here's a wad of cash, but it needs to be more meaningful than that. It needs to say more about the effort, as much about the effort as about the outcome. And so, what is in the center is something that only we can grant. And it is the ability to be a digital god. We are making a game called Godus. The whole game is about being a god to your followers. You, the person who reached the center, will be the god of all people that are playing Godus. You will intrinsically decide on the rules that the game is played by. And, here's the life-changing bit, you will share in the success of the product. Every time people spend money on Godus, you will get a small piece of that pie. We will follow up with details of what that means. It does mean, let's break this down and analyze this. It means that you will decide on how people play a game. You will accrue riches from that game, from the start until the finish of your reign. That, by any definition of the word, is life-changing. You will have fame, you will have fortune, and you will have the power to introduce morals into a game. This idea of allowing one human being to be the god of an entire game genre came to us many years ago. And it's only now, when we're all connected, when the whole of the gaming universe is connected together, that we have the power to do it. And I hope that you will find that this is worth those sore fingers that you may have gained through tapping. And I hope the world agrees with me that it is a worthy prize for the efforts of what's inside the cube. Thank you very much for all your efforts. And thank you very much to those people who didn't get to the center of curiosity. We may, who knows, start another experiment even more intriguing. Thank you very much.
Now, this video was shared to the world after Brian was given the option whether he wanted to share it or keep it private. Thankfully for us, he decided that he wanted to share it. And you know what? Being the god in a god game by the creator of the god game genre, getting money from that game and fame, that's really not a bad prize, am I right? Yes, it's amazing. Peter Molyneux had turned a simple yet addictive smartphone game into the ultimate 7-month-long marketing strategy to promote the new game Godus. Now, with all that out of the way, let's go back to November 21st, 2012 and the launch of Godus on Kickstarter. A pretty standard by today's estimations, but still rather appealing looking god game, asking for £450,000 and getting £526,563 from 17,184 backers. It wasn't as easy as one would expect to hit that goal, mind you, even with a name as legendary as Peter Molyneux at the forefront. People didn't understand why someone who had just been knighted as one of the top dogs at Microsoft would actually need this investment. He of course fought back on this, and with only 2 days to spare, if you look at KickTrack, you can see he did indeed just about make it. The game was expected to be released in September the following year, and as you may have guessed, it was very much under-delivered. The game that put you in control of a small civilization, teaching them to build settlements, gaining this game's version of currency and altering the very artsy looking terrain, was of course late. But 2 years later it did indeed find its home on mobile devices and Steam Early Access for the price of £14.99 or $20 of course if you was in the States. The idea of putting it over on Steam Early Access, which is definitely not uncommon, was to get players' feedback on what they like and what they don't like within this new game. The difference, however, is that Molyneux was at the forefront, and sadly a heavy amount of what was promised did not make it into the perfectly okay gaming experience. Don't expect me to suddenly jump on board and tell you all how terrible this game is, because I'm not going to. So many times throughout my YouTube life I've said that you can sense that a great game is hidden underneath, and never has that been more true than right here. The game is definitely solid, a rather relaxing yet enjoyable experience. The problem is, plenty of games like this exist already, and this was just way too basic. Peter Molyneux was doing brilliant PR on the lead up to this game, and even right after its launch. But its launch, even though it came in a little late, actually came in way too early. The game was, according to the devs, only 40% complete on the PC, and the mobile version, which released a while later, was actually getting more frequent updates than the PC users were getting. Why was this? Well, looking at the reviews on Steam, you get a feeling as to what the true intention behind this game was all along. You see, with Peter's back catalogue of awesomely overpromised but still awesome nonetheless god games, he garnered a pretty dedicated fan base. And again, rightfully so. And to keep them happy, he confirmed several times over that Godus was a PC game first and a mobile game second. He also confirmed that the game wasn't going to get a publisher in order to keep the original vision alive and true, and sadly, all of this was a massive lie. Dina Games were indeed privileged with publishing the mobile release of this game, a well-established publisher of high-profile mobile applications that include IPs such as Final Fantasy, G.I. Joe, NFL, Transformers, Marvel, and so many more. And although this may seem like a perfectly fine thing to happen, especially with Molyneux reassuring backers and early adopters that it wouldn't affect the overall outcome and that the PC release is still the version that they will be focusing on first, again, it was all a lie. You see, the biggest problem with Godus after you get past the rather standard building of civilization sections is getting more belief from that civilization. Belief, by the way, is your currency that lets you alter the landscape and what have you. It becomes apparent fairly early on that you're going to be waiting around a hell of a lot, watching your communities do their community thing, waiting for that belief to go up, clicking on hearts or whatever to get that belief, and not a whole lot else. When you do get that belief, it's a good, albeit very simple, godlike game. They just needed to add more filler around this mechanic that was more exciting than simply tapping or clicking on things. But sadly, it went the other way around. The more the game was updated, the longer that waiting around for your belief to rise up would occur. On top of this, not only was everybody waiting for those all-important promises to get added into the game, but several other modes were actually being stripped back. It didn't have many fans on PCs, but the ones that did like it were no longer a part of that small niche. Godus on PC was becoming a mobile game, and a mobile game that mobile users were getting for free, whilst PC users were having to pay money for. This ever-increasing shift towards a game that didn't involve your civilization collecting resources or hunting or whatever was simply a wait for the time to tick away game, or of course you could spend your stupidly hard to get gems to speed it up. Not got any? Then why not pay for them? This was supposed to be the evolution of the God game genre, and it wasn't. I haven't got an issue with this game being on mobile. If done right, it could definitely work. But it didn't, and it was slowly chipping away what few features were actually good in the far superior PC release as a result. In the end, the Kickstarter was a success to some degree at least, because you know, everyone got the game, but nobody got the game that they wanted, or more importantly, were promised. And let's be honest here guys, we shouldn't have been surprised. PC Mag actually described the situation best by saying,
"This is not Molyneux's fault, it's our fault because we should know better. You probably know the fable of the scorpion and the frog. A scorpion promises not to sting a frog as it takes him across a river, but halfway across the river it stings the frog anyway and they both die. When the frog asks why, the scorpion explains, 'It's in my nature.' Peter Molyneux is the Scorpion King of game development."
Peter had already moved on to pastures new, it seems, bringing up a new game called The Trail, which although apparently wouldn't affect the progression of Godus, obviously did. In short, the game was incredibly underwhelming. I think we have covered that enough, but with over 5,000, albeit mostly negative reviews on Steam, how much do you think that Brian Henderson made from this pretty well established user base? You remember Brian, right? Brian Henderson, the guy that clicked away on that very last cubelet to get the big reveal in the centre and, you know, to share in the profits of this Godus game.
You will have fame, you will have fortune, and you will have the power to introduce morals into a game.
How much do you think he got? Nothing. Obviously, it was nothing. Absolutely zero, nada. He got absolutely nothing. After visiting the studio, almost all communication between the two dried up. He would of course email them every month asking for an update, but even 2 years down the line, absolutely nothing was done. The communication became almost completely one-sided by this point, and obviously no money was heading his way. The reason was the hub world. The hub world wasn't made yet, making multiplayer non-existent, and therefore the God of Gods, as in Brian's prize, wasn't implemented, and that was the end of that. Now, this was all back in 2014 to 2016, a couple of years before the even more heavily mobile-focused Godus Wars was released onto Steam Early Access, which was yet again another unfinished game that was the sequel to the original unfinished game. Why do you do it to yourself, Peter? The comment section of the Kickstarter is a rather dark place, obviously. The reviews on both games are dreadful. Peter Molyneux himself, a guy that should technically be renowned for being one of the greatest game designers ever, now has crap like this being front and center of people's minds when they think about him. And Brian, the winner of the ultimate life-changing experience? Well, I reached out to him to see if there was any kind of an update or to see if he did get anything since about 2016 when this was heavily reported on. And he had this to say.
Contact between me and 22 Cans became less and less frequent, eventually fizzling out completely. I don't remember hearing from anyone from 22 Cans directly about them ceasing development. I think, along with everyone else, time passed and I assumed it was dead. Possibly the last thing I heard from anyone at 22 Cans was Peter Molyneux himself, as I do have a vague memory of being on the phone to him. I don't remember the context of it at all, or what preceded the call, or who called who. I just remember telling him I have no bad feeling toward him.
Brian Henderson still has the Curiosity app on his phone, even though obviously it doesn't work anymore. He has it there as a memento, as a medal of honor, a reminder of something cool that happened to him at some point in the past, according to that Eurogamer article. And it's my guess that he keeps it there as a reminder of something that could have been and should have been absolutely life-changing. But you know, let's not forget, it was old Molyneux making that promise, wasn't it? Hey there guys, thanks for checking out the video. As stated earlier on, this video was released a whole heck of a time ago, quite a while ago, for patrons and YouTube members, and you guys can obviously see the next, I think it's 4 or 5 episodes of Kick Scammers before they go public, and we've even got another one that we're working on right now, a crypto Kick Scammer video all about crazy crypto stuff. So if you had to see all of these well before they go public, I had a lot of fun making this one, and yeah, it was really, really good. But thank you to everybody that did watch it. Thank you for everyone that shares these videos. It's absolutely amazing that you guys still come and check out my videos. I really, really do appreciate that. But let's give some massive shout outs to the patrons and YouTube members that support me so much, that allow me to create these particular types of videos every single week that you guys obviously enjoy if you're this far into the video. So yeah, let's give an extra big shout out to Aaron Gorman, Andrew Dalton, Arista, Ben Liley, Benjamin Guy, Big Rico, Bran Perez, Brandon Gold, Cheshire One, Chris the Shapeshifter, Christopher DeVero, Clan Bob, Conrad Constantine, Cromilla, The Action Saxon, Dalton, aka Chevmatic, Daniel Tarares, Darren Watson, Dina81, Diggsy B, Dominic Devonport, Game Apologist, Gary Pinkett, Harvey2478, Intrigued Gaming, Jay's Manchild, Jabba L. Aiden, Jacob P, aka Avalon James, Jeremy Rodriguez, Jonathan Hayward, Josh Gibbons, Kinglink Reviews, Lucas Gates, Lucas Softail, Man of God 9000, Man Shovel, Matt Jackson, Michael Ridley Dash, Mike Fallon, Mind of the Unsane, Nerdy Simmer, Tatty, Nicholas Bertner, Nick Pollard, Nightwill, Pretendo64, Roll VP, yeah, Retro to Next Gen, aka Lou, Richard Alderjic, Rocket Plod, Rovan Army, Ryan Holt, Samuel Nilsson, Shade Silent, Shadow Dragon, Solix Captor, Stephen, Taylor Rainwater, That Gamer, The Cunning Linguist, The Shaded J, Tim Labonte, Tim Lunn, Toddpool Float G, Trans Rights, Vike Echo, Wobbles and Bean, The Wonder Ducks, and Ye Old Ham Burglar. Like I said before, guys, a massive thank you to all of the names that you can see right down there. All of these people support me financially to be able to create videos like these. And if you want to check out the next several videos and have that warm, fuzzy feeling to be able to support me and be able to continue helping me create these videos, then you know what to do. All of the links are down below. Thank you so much for your support, however you decide to do it. But until next time, guys, this is DJ Slope signing out, and hopefully I'll see you all next time. Cue the end song.